Saving someone else a job. So hello, my name's Mark O'Connor. I'm the head of costing. So I'm just going to give you an update on where we are with costing and also about the benchmarking review group that Brian spoke of. And I'm kind of conscious some of my material will have been covered by some of the other presentations. So just an agenda of what we'll cover: specialty costing PLC, ABF implementation plans, maybe refer back to some of the things Jacob was talking about, the ABF benchmarking review group, and community costing. So just to keep the pace, because I'm sure that table there are keen to recover the time that Brian used up. Specialty costing, I suppose we sometimes wonder how many hospitals are we actually in. I suppose it depends on how you count it. CUMH is a single site. St. Joseph's has come in as part of Beaumont, and Tala University and CHI Tala are submitted as a single site, but that does actually cover two separate hospitals. So ultimately what we're doing here, and we're doing this in the kind of familiar accountant's territory of Excel, is coming up with a full set of costs across all our ABF hospitals for the cost of admitted patients. That, I suppose, is the ABF and block split. We're accounting for 100% of what a hospital is spending. We're splitting it into what is to go into ABF and what is to go into block. And that's underpinned by our own standards, manuals, trainings, and audits. So specialty costing during COVID, it was significantly challenged by COVID, the cyber attack, the constant churn of staffing, trying to pin down who was doing what in each hospital, retraining new staff, seeing them go and having to retrain the replacement. It was also affected by the fact that there were no ABF budget adjustments, and ABF, to a large degree, slipped off people's agendas. The costing returns were, seen as not being necessary anymore, and so it was a real struggle to keep that pipeline of information going. But I suppose the achievements are that we did achieve a full set of costs for keeping that kind of ABF reporting pipeline going, and that information was crucial in our response to the COVID pandemic. It was used to cost. We saw our complement of critical care beds increase by from 250-ish to over 300. So the information that you guys are giving us was instrumental in that, and also in supporting other services. I would, like to acknowledge, there was an enormous amount of effort by some people in the hospitals. We are aware that, some of the people that we're engaging with in the hospitals, costing isn't their only job. They don't just go into a department and cost as a job. They wear very many different hats. They suffer different calls from different people and lots of different pressure. So I would like to thank and acknowledge the work of the costing staff out in the hospitals in keeping that essential line of information going. And just speaking about COVID costs, this is quite relevant at the moment. And again, this is just looking at the ABF hospitals. So there was quite an awful lot of costs reported as being related to COVID over the past number of years, about 348 up to 382 last year. But our objective with those costs was to see a consistent treatment applied across all of the hospitals. We really want to see a level playing field applied to all hospitals, which really should be the basis for all ABF. So much of this was related to patient expenditure and hence is included in the ABF prices. So, the costs excluded from COVID was 71 million in 2020. So, we really included 348 minus 71 in our base price. The exclusions related to stuff like PPE. Some hospitals bought their own PPE early on in COVID, whereas some hospitals had it provided for them free of charge. There was some capital developments. So I suppose in kind of, we're seeing queries now about the ABF, the overruns in the HSE. So we have included an awful lot of COVID within our prices over the last couple of years, and we're waiting to see what what that ends up being in 2022. But we have published guidance. We did publish guidance. We followed the letter of determination headings with the prescribed costing treatment for each heading, so that there is a constant, consistent basis applied there. So PLC, it's installed in 23 hospitals. We had staff in 4 of those hospitals trained just a couple of weeks ago. And it is labour intensive that it's processed by a hospital finance person along with the extensive support from ICT. We use it to set relativities between DRGs. You know, we all know that a very sick, complex stroke is more expensive than a simple stroke, but we need to know by how much. And you know, PLC is the means by which we do that. You know, it's the costs of the complex stroke versus the simple strokes that set those relativities. And you know, I suppose some of the things that, you know, we're talking about putting, you know, the uses by hospitals that we want to see them developing this and using it for, to benchmark costs between sites and between hospital and groups. And, you know, if the essence of a DRG is that patients within a DRG should be clinically similar and on average cost a similar amount of resources, then why would patients within a DRG cost 5,000 for one consultant versus 4,000 for another consultant, or 10,000 in one hospital versus 8,000 in another hospital? And those are the sort of cost differences we're looking to identify with the PLC information. Yeah, we've kind of some of the earlier talks mentioned about, you know, getting clinicians involved, and I see that this is the way we get clinicians involved. Myself and another colleague, we do some engagement with clinical directors through the RCSI Clinical Directors Programme. And, you know, I asked a set of about 25 clinical directors, how many of you just consider yourselves to be budget holders? And they all went cold at the question, and they considered themselves to be entirely removed from finance, and that holding on to budgets and being responsible for budgets was seen very much as being at hospital level or group level. So I think this is the means by which we can create a common language with clinicians. And you know, I suppose we can use it as well then for data quality issues. And really, you know, this is kind of a repeated slide that kind of shows up in pretty much everything I do, that PLC is the only place where we put all of our data together. HYPE, which is telling us what types of patients we have and what conditions they have. And, you know, we will have that in future, you know, as Lord and Fiacre will speak about our OPD and ED classification. So we know what types of patients we have and what their DRGs are, what their patient groups are. It takes in all of our general ledger, so we know what we're spending and where we're spending it. And our hospital systems, where they exist, are telling us what resources they consumed. So I suppose the benefit for hospitals, and, you know, the reason for in terms of ABF, is that up-to-date patient level costing, if that goes into our ABF model, we have up-to-date ABF prices, and that will then result in more accurate hospital and group RHA results. And really, that's just what I say there about hospitals with significant activity in a DRG. They must submit PLC returns in order to ensure it's accurately priced. So if a hospital is a national specialty in a particular service, and that service, you know, we kind of, CAR-T is where patients receive extremely expensive therapies, upwards of $250,000. We can't build that into our prices, or if there are, you know, new services that happen in a hospital, we can't know about it unless it's been put in at the hospital level. So we need that data feeding our prices and coming out. And you would also then, you know, for something like the CAR-T, where, you know, our relativities are based on old data that's 2 years older, we need to know what's happening in the meantime. So we need to know, well, you know, you're being funded at €20,000 per patient, but because these patients are getting a particular therapy, they're actually costing $250,000 each. So we need to adjust for those patients in the ABF model. So the ABF implementation plans, the groups and the hospitals, we had a roadshow in Q4 2022. Now, we did acknowledge during that roadshow that groups are different. So there's different geographical sizes and shapes. There's a different mix of voluntary and statutory hospitals group to group. There's a different mix of hospital models, more on that later on, although Fiacre did touch on that. And some of those groups have employed the group resources that were allocated to them in the first ABF plan, and some not. Some groups have employed further resources at group level. So we gave, and I suppose I did try and amend this at lunchtime. I must have a bit of version control. I did just put in a note here saying, well done, Jacob. I think, the experience Jacob spoke of this morning really was of a group that has picked up ABF, that has used the resources from the first ABF plan, that has supplemented those resources with some of their own, and that stands ready to use the additional resources that we have available. There's never enough. We don't have as much as what people have asked us for, but that's a group that has really picked up the ball, and I suppose that manifested itself by the fact that their coding is up to date. Their specialty costing returns are all received by the due date. They're planning on having every one of their hospitals completed P22 PLC by the end of July. So that then leaves them in a fantastic position to look at what's my cost versus value. How does the cost of my patients compare against the value that they're achieving in the benchmarking model, and to look for the differences within, and then to go and chase that back in terms of working out, well, what's value. And I think then, Jacob, you did mention about talking, engaging with devolved budgeting. I think that's where we get clinicians involved. And again, we just provide an adjustment at hospital level. That doesn't speak to clinicians. They want adjustments or not information that's personal to them. So just getting back to the ABF plan, so the HPO gave the groups autonomy because of all the points above there on the discipline, grade, location of the staff involved. And those resources have allocated to most groups and are due to be allocated to the remaining groups, and probably would have issued if our email hadn't been hamstrung yesterday. Benchmarking in 2024, it will be based on the costs that you're providing us now, the 2022 costs and activity. We're increasing the number of hospitals, so the Limerick Group, Ennisnina and Maternity Hospital in RCSI, Monaghan General and St. Joseph's is being included as part of the Beaumont return. The transition, or your exposure to ABF, is increasing by 2.5% to 85%, and we've spoken about the roadmap for that in the years to come. What we also want to do is change the way we're doing those adjustments. We've up to now we've done them on a kind of year on year, that the adjustment goes into your base and then we adjust on an incremental basis. And I think hospitals have found that confusing, that a hospital can actually achieve a positive ABF adjustment in their budget, but yet be a very poor performing hospital. So a hospital that gets a -3 adjustment in one year and a -2.9 the following year, it actually looks in your budget allocation that you've actually had a good year. So what we want those adjustments to be is one-off, so you actually see how a hospital has performed clearly in your adjustments. All the adjustments to submitted costs and activity to be clear and transparent. So any data you send us in, if we adjust it, you're informed as part of that, and that is transparent. I suppose this will be the first published ABF model since COVID, and I guess we're all waiting to see what's the results of that model, because we don't know what the impact of COVID is, in terms of the shifts in activity from one hospital to another in terms of the cost profile. And I think common weighted unit, all I'll just say is alleluia and hip hip hooray that we will be reporting on that for the future. So the ABF benchmarking review group, the membership, the HPO costing team, data analytics and coding, ABF group accountants and representatives from acute hospital finance and acute operations representatives. I suppose one of the objectives to adopt a clear and transparent manner of communicating the ABF related adjustments to the groups, present the results in a manner that's easily understood, establish a process for dealing with the unique issues or high cost items and the data required to support those submissions. And any hospital that has patient level costing to support those submissions has information at a far more granular level and a far more meaningful level, rather than just saying, well, my specialty costs 10 million. We think these patients are 15% of that, and without that granular information, working out what are high cost patients is very difficult. Then it's a forum then to deal with the structural issues that affect benchmarking performance. So the way we currently run ABF model, and the picture there, that's what you get if you Google closing the door after the horse is bolted. And I guess what I'm engaging with here is an element of self-criticism is the way we do ABF. That the way we do it at the moment is we base, it's based on costs for a previous calendar year. So the money's been spent, the calendar year has passed, and that money can't change. And it's also based on a closed file, a HYPE file. So the patients have been coded, they've left the hospital, the HYPE file has changed. And we run a model where hospitals have, possibly large positive and minus adjustments. And sometimes we are kind of are in a bit, we get a bit of a surprise late in the day as to the size of those adjustments, and we have to find ways and means of making them, turning the graph between the highest and the smallest from that into something a little bit flatter. And also, I would say that ABF benchmarking is the only place where hospital and groups get to see how they have performed relative to others. And I suppose that kind of, again, Jacob, gets back to your point that, hospitals need to see each other's data earlier than that to actually work out the direction of travel. And I think that's something we need to do. So I suppose the ABF benchmarking review group approach, that's a cute Labrador attempting to look around the corner, which is really what I'm trying to propose here. And I did actually over lunchtime put in perhaps a change in culture, maybe attempting to score some brownie points with Bernard Gloucester. So I suppose our change of culture really is that we need to become more actively engaged on managing and focusing on a current year in progress and looking around that corner. So, how is your gross expenditure going? And again, this is all, relative to other hospitals. Is the expenditure linked with activity? We've seen, I have a point there about new developments. We've seen this year a group where that is increased an awful lot of expenditure over the last couple of years, and I think it's only actually in 2022 where you can actually see I see you, Mary, I'll try and ignore you, but it's only when you see the activity increase that maybe they're only getting the benefit now of that expenditure in previous years coming through in terms of activity and complex patients. Where are hospitals ahead of the national average? And I think we do need to allow hospitals to see where they are versus the national average from for all of the different inputs, be they costs or coding, coming up with reasons or solutions to backlogs. Looking at the complexity across AD or G, we can go back to visiting Limerick and showing them years ago that their B70As were of a much lower level than their peer hospitals. To ensure that everyone is coding their complexity fully. They also deal with the issue of ambulatory patients being in admitted activity. Where's your average length of stay by D or G versus the national average? Weighted units increases, case mix index complexity. And ultimately, it all boils down to where is your cost per weighted unit versus your other hospitals, because that's ultimately the key measure in ABF. If your cost per weighted unit, and thankfully that's moving to common weighted unit, so if you're above it, you're going to do poorly in ABF, and if you're below it, you'll get a positive case mix adjustment. And I suppose the objective is to positively affect the ABF inputs before they come final, so we're not closing the door after the horse is bolted. This is, and I suppose I'll better hurry up now, but this is an old slide to show how reconfiguration can affect an ABF hospital. This is actually Mallow quite a number of years ago, between 2011 and 2014. And very briefly, what that graph is showing is that because of reconfiguration, their ED closed, their ICU closed, and they moved from being a general hospital to what we would now call a Model 2 hospital, that they lost a huge amount of their complexity. It's gone down from almost 1 to almost 0.5. But what happened was that you can see that their gross costs were only affected very marginally. So they were still employing the same numbers of nurses. So I think this is the sort of things that we have to be cognizant of. And this is where we go back into model types. And I think, Owen, it was a bit of analysis you did on, our last kind of internal budget model that showed, well, maybe Model 2 hospitals aren't performing too well in isolation. And, every group has Model 4s, Model 3s, some groups have maternity, orthopedic. So, there is a different mix of hospitals in every group, but are some groups overly disadvantaged by that mix? And you can draw your own conclusions from that, from the figures there. That are hospitals that have a preponderance of Model Twos disadvantaged by the case mix model, or by the ABF model. So some items for consideration by the group, I've probably gone through some of this already. The backlogs, resources spent ahead of activity, allocations of cost based on old information. Again, if a hospital isn't, I see the red stop sign now, Mary, as well. So, so hospitals not influencing their own DRGs with PLC returns. Changes in relative values and weighted units. I suppose changes in classifications. I was actually I will, because I'm up here and I'm not going till I've related the story. I remember when myself and Helen, we used to be the Bonnie and Clyde of case mix in the Mater. And I think one year we got 300 plus, the next year we got 400 plus. But the next year I knew we were in for a bath, we were going to get killed. And then out of nowhere we shifted to ADRGs. And because the ADRGs then created much more complexity for the Mater's activity to float into, we did quite well, and the hospital sailed on unknowingly. So we are changing our group, or we're updating our coding. That was a revolution. What we're doing now is we're really just evolving from one version of Australia's coding to another, but that has subtle effects on how hospitals do the changes in DRGs. The last time around we saw rehab changing. Expenditure related to quality. I'm thinking, Caroline Mooney, if your hand is wave up in the air. So, you've made the point that our new development, it's all about single bedded units. So, is the staffing in those units different to other, different to, similar types of patients? Changes in policy, cases moving between areas, ambulatory gynecology units. Anyone who knows them can, what's going on there can speak to that. And differences in admission policy. What I have up there is our 4 specialist maternity hospitals and the number of day cases they had in 2022. So one of them had 12,000, one of them has 1. So you would think that they would be teaching or treating the same types of patients. I hear the coughing, Lorna, too. So, but yet, when we look at their admitted activity, there's a very significant difference. I suppose just to say that there are no magic fixes for some issues. And I suppose one of the dangers for us is that it is a bit of a warts and all group. It challenges us to address some of these issues rather than publish the results and move on. Costing an IFMS, I'm just going to say we've put in embedded attributes that I think allow IFMS to report on the sort of things that we've been reporting on in the years past. And just briefly on community costing, I suppose in summary, we consider ourselves very much experts in acute hospitals. I think, we very much got our L plates on in terms of community costing. Plus as well, there are many differences between, an acute hospital is 4 walls. You're kind of bounded in by those 4 walls. We also have the rich data source that is HYPE, that's implemented uniformly across all of our acute hospitals. We don't have that in community in the community area, our objectives for community costing are the same: to ensure efficient use, to ensure that there's a national approach, about supporting the Sláinte Care objectives of shift left, and get clinical and service engagement. Marcella and Mary, they've done an awful lot of work in scoping out the area and dealing with international experts, because quite a number of 7 a.m. meetings with people on the other side of the world. Huge amount of engagement with some of the various stakeholders regarding ongoing developments. And there has been a draft, we have a draft report ready, a scoping that comes to a conclusion of what those engagements are, what those learnings are, and suggesting, what the routes forward may be. And I suppose one of the benefits of this has been to meet people like yourself, John, that may have beneficial data sets that can add to us, because we have, GDPR has kind of put a block, or, data protection has put a block onto some suggested, potential pilot studies that we thought would be more accessible. But I suppose stuff like ICCMS is out there, Inter-RAI is out there, but they're all future developments that aren't ready to go at the moment. A costing webpage supported by Brian and his wonderful staff in HPO ICT. I suppose that's just the final slide. That's our internal website or external website. And I'd just like to pay tribute to Angai, Caroline, Owen, Marcella, Mary, Marie and Shane, that they're very invested in your data. They're a resource for you. They're ready to support you at a minute's notice to travel and ensure that you're supported in providing us the information we need for ABF. So, look, thank you very much.
Thank you.